So getting into volume 17 for Jobless Reincarnation, honestly looking at the volume number and just kind of reflecting on the journey, it's really been such a epic journey. And I've been saying over and over and over again, and I feel like a broken record, that I've been really enjoying the road for Jobless Reincarnation, because it always just feels like there's so many interesting characters that add multiple layers to the world, to the politics, to the ever-evolving atmosphere going on. And it kind of shows now, as these last couple of volumes, you can kind of see where the story is kind of going, but it's still shrouded in a bit of mystery. But you kind of understand that there's an overall objective that it's trying to get to, and that the man god has become the big bad, or at least, the big bad in the sort of the shadows, puppeting all these different characters. And in the early stages of the story, for me, I would have never guessed that, because the man god was kind of manipulating, but kind of, was helping Rudy a little bit. But you could kind of see that he was steering him with ulterior motives, but you wouldn't, at least for me, I didn't really guess at that point that he was this big bad person until you started seeing some of those later components. And maybe that's just me, but some of the things I did guess in this volume was Luke. I kind of figured Luke was being kind of manipulated by the man god, but didn't feel like he had much of a grasp on Luke, because of the fact that you have a couple of characters in this that are very heavily influenced. So the general premise of the story, the start, just to kind of explain for those that haven't read it, is they're now on their way to the capital, Riv Ariel, to put her on the throne. So she's going through all the whole political games. She's got Rudy, Fitz is there, Luke is there, Eris has come along. Then you've also got our girl herself, Ghislaine, who she is sort of on a mission to get revenge for her previous master. And of course, Eris and her family members that were basically just head off straight away as a scapegoat, which is something for anime-only fans you would have seen in Season 1, but for light novel fans, you knew about this ages ago. But for anime-only fans, if you're watching this, yeah, that's basically Season 1 where the head went off. Ghislaine is trying to get revenge for all of that. And the thing that I really love about this volume is the politics and how realistic and grounded the politics is, because it's very gritty, and it's even Ariel's doing things that aren't necessarily good, but it's how you play the game. You've got to play the game. And it reminds me a little bit of like how Game of Thrones approach politics as well, because there are some power fantasies out there, whether live action or anime based, that go into politics that don't really give a grounded reality of how politics works in general, and how gruesome it could be in the fantasy or the medieval times back, kings and queens and royalty and all that. And even to this day now, let's be honest, that politics can be very much of a puppeting game, a mind manipulation game, using words and twisting them and using people to gain what you want. And that's just kind of how the world works, whether we like it or not. And that's what I like about Jobless Reincarnation. When it dives into many of these different components, it is very heavily grounded in reality. And as much as Ariel is a good person by heart, she still has to play the game, much like it reminds me of Tyrion from Game of Thrones, where he was a good person, but even he knew that he had to play the game, and he had to play it well to survive and to overall try and do some good in a very messed up world. And that's what I absolutely loved about this volume. Ariel does an absolute brilliant job, or the writer does, building her character more, fleshing it out. But Luke being manipulated is the main character that kind of was being for readers, because there are other characters as well, ones that have connections to Eris, the training for her, the water god style and all that, and then there's some others that pop in that are kind of being manipulated by the man god. And it's kind of this whole game now, it's Orsted versus the man god, and Rudy is one of sort of the soldiers that's fighting for Orsted. It almost feels like Rudy is in a sense like a side character, and Orsted's feels like a main character, and you're kind of just seeing it from the perspective of a side character. I know that seems kind of weird to phrase, but it just does kind of feel that way sometimes, because Orsted just has such a heavy influence on where the story is going, and he is a major character in the story, and you learn more and more and more about him, and he does play a very pivotal role in the story now. Like at the early stage of the story, you generally didn't like him. At least that was kind of how the story was trying to perceive it, like he was a bad person, but then you kind of understand that there's a lot more to him and there's many layers to it. Also, the finger of Ariel, when she meets him and she ends up wetting herself, I don't know if that was just because of the fact that his presence was just that overwhelming because of the curse and everything, or that, and also just the fact that she maybe got a little bit too excited, because she is a little bit strange with some of her kinks, so it kind of made me wonder if there was a little bit of both. But then later on, he walks into a room full of nobles and many of them fainted and then also, yeah, wet themselves as well, so it kind of made me wonder, maybe it was just that she was just so overwhelmed. But to be honest, she has got a lot of kinks, so I mean, to be honest, she's one of my favorite characters, and it's not just because of the kings, it's just, yeah, she's just a fun character. She's very multi-layered, she's very realistic and grounded, but hey, yes, some of that other stuff does make it more interesting as well. And I mean, to be honest, it's not unrealistic either. There's a lot of weird people out there with a lot of weird fetishes. One day I'll have to do story time on my main channel and talk about some of the weird people that I've met in my life that have some weird kinks, but I really loved where that story went, and especially when Luke grabs Ariel and holds the sword, because they're basically going through this stage where they get into the city, get into the capital, they've got to go underground, go through a bandits thing, and Ariel's kind of figured that Rudy's kind of going off, having a chat with someone else, and clearly he's hiding something and he's trying to steer them in a very specific direction. I mean, she's a smart cookie, so she's kind of twigged to that. And then once she gets on board, they're kind of really steering everyone down this specific path, and Luke, being left in the dark, is kind of getting more suspicious and thinking that Ariel's been manipulated, Rudy's been manipulated because of everything going on. And then once they get to the sort of the big political game where Ariel's playing her cards, or like a chessboard in a sense, pulling her pieces onto the board and showing her hand now, and then the opposition doing theirs as well, with the whole sort of almost massacre kind of thing, but it wasn't. It was like, they come in, they're doing some severe damage, there's a bit of a brawl going on, but it's kind of a bit of a stalemate right up until Orsted comes in and then just completely decimates one, and then many of the other pieces of the board end up collapsing. And so you really see all the different plans that Ariel had in mind, and even some of those didn't go well. But then Luke, right at the end, when his father's life's on the line, he kind of breaks a little bit, grabs her, holds a sword, and then there's this fight between Luke and Fitz, and Luke asks the question of, who would you choose, Rudy or Ariel? And she chooses Rudy over Ariel, and Rudy gets a little bit smug about it. I think that's probably the worst time to be a little bit smug about it, but it really does show that Fitz really does trust Rudy, and as much as Rudy's a little bit secretive, a little bit sketchy at times, she knows that he's looking out for the best interest. It's just sometimes things aren't as simplistic as they seem, but Ariel has a way of words to calm Luke down, basically saying, I'm your princess, and what are you? He says, I'm your knight. So he does end up calming down, and at the end of the day, his father does get spared, which Ghislaine agrees to, only because Eris is like, hey, you know, we got revenge, we basically knocked out some of the other pieces of the puzzle or pieces of the board that were responsible for her family and all the things that happened during the displacement issue. So you see all those layers to it, and I just, again, really loved how the story was going there, and I'm really excited to see now where the story goes, because there's this extra chapter as well, and I can only guess one character because it doesn't say who the characters are in this extra chapter, but it hints at it, and I can guess one of them is Geese, but I don't know who the other character is. And basically, the only reason why I know it's Geese is one of them is the one at the bar getting drunk, is because of the way he talks about Rudy and says, boy, kind of thing. The way he talks about Rudy is a very distinct kind of standoutish kind of thing. I mean, there are others, but it was kind of obvious that it was Geese, at least in my mind. It might not be, but I don't want spoilers on who the other person is, but it's very clear that this other person is being influenced by the man god, so I'm thinking that Geese is now being influenced by the man god. The next sort of part to the man god's plan is being put into motion, because this one failed. Technically this would be the third plan that he's setting up, because the first one failed, which was killing off his family, and the second one would be this, and then the third one would be whatever the man god's got planned, unless I'm kind of missing something. But now seeing that Geese, I just assume it's Geese at this point, that clearly the next pieces of the puzzle are going to be put into place, and there's going to be another confrontation that is going to arise. When that happens, just have to wait and see, but I'm very excited for volume 18 to see what the next phase of the man god's plan is, and Orsted's plan in trying to counter that. And you learn more about Orsted as well. It's basically kind of like Groundhog Day, where he relives these events. But the thing that kind of still puzzles me though, and maybe I missed something in the light novel, is that Orsted almost acts as if Rudy's an anomaly. Like Rudy was never part of that loop until just recently. Which kind of stands out because Orsted does mention that Rudy shouldn't have been there. So it feels like Orsted's been in this time loop over and over and over and over and over again, and the newest time loop, the one that he's in now, something's changed where Rudy's now appeared in this time loop. And that's what's kind of really interesting. Now maybe I've misinterpreted it, I need to go reread it again, but that's kind of how I interpreted it. So very intrigued to see more about that, because I feel like there's clearly some piece of the puzzle missing, and I do love the way they tell you a lot, but they don't tell you everything that's going on in the story. So Ariel's now on the throne. Basically, she's got all her pieces of the puzzle, all of those that are now giving her loyalty, even though some of them are questionable at least, but at least most of them are bending the knee and giving her loyalty. The other thing though too that Orsted did point out is that it was fundamental that she took over, because there were sort of two pathways that it could go. Is if Ariel takes over, when a certain event happens, she will respond with magic, and if another individual that she was trying to contest against, if they won, then it would have turned into more of a military based thing, just not the best outcome, and it would have led into a bloody war. Everything would have gone bad. But Ariel's response was a lot more strategical, a lot more thought through. So she clearly builds things up, changes policies, and even though these events that play out in the future happen after she's passed away, her influence on the kingdom and the policies and the mindset has drastically changed them to go down a very different path. So I do really like that as well, because it kind of shows that there are like a fork in a pathway, and you can clearly see that each different path goes a specific way. So the man god wanted to go the bad one. Orsted wants to make sure that Ariel is put in charge. Also, Eris is part of the story as well. As I mentioned, she was part of the whole journey, and seeing Eris is just, I love Eris, and also her reminiscing with her friend as well that was there. So there's the extra chapters that I haven't talked about yet that I'm planning to talk about if I have or have not uploaded them yet. But she's kind of reminiscing with one of her friends that she trained with during those extra chapters, and then there's also the water god style teacher there as well. So one of the things that I did enjoy about that is that even though the story is heavily focused around Fitz or Sylvia, Luke and Ariel, and getting her to the throne, Ariel itself, and Rudy's assisting Orsted, and then there's also other minor characters, Eris still has a sort of link to the story with the water god style teacher, her friend that she trained with. So there's little things, and that again falls back to previous points where every character kind of has some ripple effect from the past to the future, and all these other little intertwining components. So I really did love Eris's contribution to the story, and also Ghislaine as well, because of course Ghislaine wanted to get revenge for past events. And also when Ghislaine was doing the sort of the last moments where they like brings out a wooden sword for Rudy and Eris, they have a bit of training, and then Eris balls her eyes out because Ghislaine's going away, but even though there's new teleportation circles there, so technically they're not really separated that far away, they can easily see each other very often. So it made a touching farewell seem kind of redundant, but it kind of made it fun as well, because it kind of just showed that the world kind of feels a lot smaller now. Like in the early stages of the story, the distance between places is massive, but some places are very small now in the sense of distance because of the portals that they can kind of take. So it makes some things really easy to kind of move around with. It's a smart but also convenient story point, but it doesn't seem unrealistic either because there's been a lot of depth behind the whole summoning circles and stuff like that. The last part, other than the extra chapter, was Rudy getting home, him talking to his dad, not his dad alive, but going to the grave, bringing a drink and sort of talking about his journey and him reflecting on it, and then also him seeing Roxy, and Roxy has a bit of a belly, and the interaction between him and Roxy. And that also falls back to previous points that I've brought up, is that each of the wives contributes to the story in different ways, some more prevalent, much more combat orientated, some a little bit more on the side part, and they move around in their roles depending on what events are going on. And Fitz is kind of taking now that role of playing the more mother figure now that her journey is over with Ariel. Now that Ariel has been put on the throne in her position of power, Fitz is kind of thinking that she's now going to take a more back seat and become the mother of the family and kind of take care of all the kids. So it looks like she won't just be taking care of her own kids, she'll be taking care of Eris's and Roxy's as well, while Roxy is more doing the tutoring or the teaching and stuff, and Eris is going to be with Rudy dealing with these issues that are going to possibly be cropping up, because it's clear as day that the old god, or not the old god, the man god is not finished. I mean, he's kind of an old god, he's been around for a while, but the man god is going to be probably another thorn in the side. So Eris being strong, being able to defend and stand side by side with Rudy will be very helpful, as much as both Fitz or Sylphia and Roxy are very strong and capable. They've got their own roles to play as well. So I do feel like each of the wives plays a very fundamental and important part of the story. So it's what I absolutely love about the story. There's so many more other things that I will be talking about in the future as I do analysis videos on specific characters and specific points of the story. So if there's something that I've missed, again, I will probably cover it in a future video, but there's only so much I can talk about in each individual volume review / analysis explain, because there's just so much going on and it's such a joy to read and go through the story. So again, love to know what your thoughts are. Definitely look forward to more Jobless Reincarnation content and other content as well on the channel. And if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more anime content, and I'll see you beautiful nerds in the next video.